Hello, and welcome to the Jewish Policy Center webinar. I am Shoshana Bryan, Senior Director of the JPC, and your host. This one, as you probably know, is a recorded program, and it's being posted on the JPC website and sent to those people who came on last Thursday to watch our guest, Barry Shaw, and were disappointed by the technology. Barry's tech problem has been fixed, and we are back. We've done some updating. The funerals for the returned hostages, the Bibas family, will take place after this conversation. So if you think that last week was hard, this week, prepare yourself. Life is different. Israel is different. Israelis are different. And we are not going to dwell totally on the inhumanity heaped on the hostages released from Gaza or the inhumanity being heaped on those who remain in captivity. I will say, though, that my response has been what it has been since October 7th. May Hashem bless the people of Israel, living and past, and may Hashem avenge them all. Sodom and Gomorrah, in my view, is a good model. Our guest, Barry Shaw, is going to help us understand how things are unfolding in Israel, specifically how the government of Israel will attempt to change the parameters of the deal with Hamas based on Israel's determination that Hamas be forced out of Gaza or face consequences. What I like about that is it's in alignment with the statements by President Trump, Secretary of State Rubio, and Secretary of Defense Hegseth. He will give us some insights into the new IDF Chief of Staff and the thinking that's emerging. Before I introduce Barry and turn him loose, let's go with our short JPC commercial. We were founded in 1985 to provide perspectives and analysis of foreign and domestic policy by scholars, academics, and commentators. I know, the domestic side seems to have gotten short shrift since October 7th, but we are not ignoring it. You can find us on our website, jewishpolicycenter.org, and there you can sign up for our Insight articles and our magazine In Focus Quarterly. The winter issue of In Focus is up now. It is Iran, Freedom or Fire. The spring issue is coming in March, and that is our domestic policy issue. That's jewishpolicycenter.org. The JPC supports a strong American defense capability, U.S.-Israel security cooperation, and missile defense. Right now, our most important job is to support the legitimacy and security of Israel against anyone who would deny them. And now, more than ever, we support the government of Israel and the IDF in their in their defense of the people and in bringing the perpetrators of the massacres, rapes, hostage-taking, and rocket barrages to justice. And after the horrific scenes that have played out recently, making Hamas and its fellow travelers pay, or asking Hashem to do the job. And now our guest, Barry Shaw, is a Senior Associate for Public Diplomacy at the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. He is also the author of Fighting Hamas, BDS, and Anti-Semitism. His other books include 1917, From Palestine to the Land of Israel, BDS for Idiots, and my personal favorite, A Tale of Love and Destiny, The Life of Sarah Aronson, a Jewish heroine. She was the only woman to lead a major spy ring in wartime, right under the nose of the enemy, which was, at that time, British mandatory authority in Palestine. It is a great book. And now, Barry Shaw, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I want to start by discussing something you mentioned in your intro, and I want to raise this point. During the Holocaust, there were individual non-Jews who saved and rescued Jews, even at great risk to themselves. Oskar Schindler is one. Even Spielberg made a movie about him. Another was a Japanese ambassador who punished for saving hundreds of European Jews from the Nazis. Junichi Sugihara, by the way, has a street named after him here in Netanya, not far from where I'm sitting. We honor and respect such brave individuals. Now, I dare anyone to name one Palestinian who saved or rescued one Israeli in Gaza since the Hamas suicidal attack and body snatching of the 7th of October 2023, over 500 days ago. You won't find one righteous Palestinian, not one. Every one of them are cut from the same cloth as the German Nazis, down to every child we saw dancing in the hideous display of the Palestinian performance with children, believe it or not, singing and dancing, celebrating the slaughter of the two innocent Bebas babies who were lying at their coffins at their feet on the stage in Gaza. And you know what was written on their coffins of these Bebas babies and the supposed mother? Of course, it was a mistaken identity. Arrested on the 7th of the 10th, 2023. These Bebas babies, Aria and Kfir, were arrested. That's what your Hamas supporters will probably be advertising or promoting in America on your campuses. Your media, your human rights organizations need to apologize to the Israelis that have been killed, tortured, raped, and taken hostages as pawns in a Hamas malicious strategy to remain in power. Now, it just so happens that Ariel and Kfir Bibas were being strangled to death, listen to this, at the same time as your students were ripping off their pictures off posters on your campuses and in the streets of your towns in America and other places. Can you imagine how hideous this is in retrospect? And we will be having perhaps the most emotional mass funeral in our history. And yet the Hamas over there will be still championing the Hamas and Palestinian cause. And this funeral takes place and millions of Israelis will be participating in this, watching on television. But this is happening on the same day as Steve Witkoff is arriving in Israel. Don't you know that? He's coming over here in order to pursue what's called stage 2 of the hostage release and an end to the conflict. And he made 2 statements on CNN recently. I expect to see phase 2 of the deal to move forward. And he also has to see that, in fact, that Israel and others will comply with this. So I'll hand it over to you because I've got other things to say about this. But I don't want to give you too much shock and awe in one go.
We are sitting here waiting for what Steve Witkoff has to say to the Israeli government and military tomorrow. I think we're just going to wait for that. And so I do think, Barry, that we should go on to what the Israeli government is working on and thinking, because I don't want to be blindsided by the government when Steve Witkoff gets there and the Israeli government says something that Americans will think is out of left field. What's the Israeli government thinking?
Well, I'll tell you a couple of things. First of all, Witkoff said also that Hamas cannot be part of the government in Gaza. I want to know what this means, actually. I really hope we can trust in Steve Witkoff in that he is going to be a true and strong ally in Israel and not a go-between. I think over here, what he's done so far, apparently for the release of the hostages, has been good. But there are still some people over here who are thinking is perhaps he is in too closely embedded with Qatar based on a New York $613 million deal in which Qatar saved his real estate hide on that. And I hope this isn't going to get in the way. I hope he's going to be, in this particular case, closer to Israel than he will be in Qatar. Qatar are being, of course, one of the main supporters and funders of Hamas. So this is going to be a true test of Witkoff's, not just diplomacy, but where his head and heart lies. But it's going to be a real test of this. I can tell you, moving on, some things that may be particularly relevant, because what Benjamin Netanyahu has been saying is that first we have to get all our hostages home. And if this means extending what they call phase 1 before it leaps over into stage 2, as it will on the 1st of March, in order to effect the release of all of the hostages before we have to do what Hamas is demanding. And to remind your audience, they are demanding that Israel, the IDF, has to move away from the Philadelphia corridor. I think it's obvious to everybody where they're concentrated on that, because that's their main smuggling tunnel from Egypt, a compliant Egypt, I would have you know. but also that all the IDF has to physically move completely out of Gaza before they will remove or return the last hostages. I don't think this can stand, because the main test is this, that Benjamin Netanyahu has decreed, and he has the majority of the Israelis behind him, that in fact Hamas cannot get away with what has they've been performed for the last 510 more days since the 7th of October and what they're doing today. Now, some factual things. There was a meeting a few days ago in the headquarters of the IDF Intelligence and Planning in Tel Aviv, and this included Kogat. Kogat, for those that don't know, is the official Israeli humanitarian aid organization. They accompany the IDF in whether it's bringing civilians in from Syria for hospitalization, or people from Gaza, or even allowing aid into Gaza. Now, this is significant. It's supposed to be about the new military strategy in Judea and Samaria. This is to counter the rise of Hamas terrorism from the Arab towns, supposedly under the control of the Palestinian Authority. I don't want to get sidetracked there, but there are some major operations going on over there right now. However, I want to bring this more into relation of what we, perhaps Israel, is going to do when it comes to Gaza. It may escape also your attention that next week, on a daily basis, the outgoing IDF Chief of Staff, Hezi Halevi, is releasing reports of the screw-up, let's put it that way, quite simply, of the IDF on the 7th of October. And each day they are going to give a report of why they failed on each of the settlements on the Gaza border, and also in Sderot as well. But this is to stretch out the defect of the IDF and the Israeli intelligence on that day, the 7th of October. But bringing it up to date, Benjamin Netanyahu has relieved both the head of the Mossad and the head of the Shin Bet of their duties in negotiating with Qatar and the other partners like Egypt the ongoing terms of the agreement or disagreement with Hamas to the end of the war. And this is important for this reason, because he has also elected a new Israeli chief of staff who will be taking over from Halevi. And Eyal Zamir comes from a different background. Now, people, you may ask, well, Israel went about their war in Gaza, but they were stopped from doing what we wanted to achieve by the Biden administration. That is partly and possibly in the main true. But also, I just want to educate this. Hezi Halevi came from a special ops organ, a branch of the IDF. They're the elite units that go behind enemy line in surgical strikes and then extract themselves, or with other they're coming out with, whether it's prisoners or whether it's information. Zamir comes from a completely different background. And this is the reason Bibi elected him. Zamir comes from an armored corps background, tanks, armored corps. And he is going to apply a completely different warfare in Gaza if and when Israel goes in to remove Hamas, if Steve Witkoff cannot remove Hamas from Gaza. And Israel is not going to be satisfied of saying, oh, Hamas saying, okay, we'll allow Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority to be the authority, but they will be there supporting him. We will not allow Gaza to become the new Lebanon. In other words, we will not allow Hamas to become the Hezbollah of Gaza, for instance, where you had a propped up government over there, but it was really Hamas running Lebanon. This is what's going to happen if you think you can deceive Israel and this Israeli government by saying, okay, the Arabs are meeting, Steve Witkoff is going to be attending their meeting, and they're going to insist that if perhaps there's going to be a different leadership in Gaza, maybe the Palestinian Authority, while Hamas will remain unarmed, but they will be there. Really? Israel will not tolerate that. And the new type of warfare you're going to see, I can outline it because this is assessing the man himself, is you are going to see a warfare of, what is it that your President Donald Trump said, all hell will be let loose?
He did.
Donald Trump invited the people of Gaza, if they're innocent people of Gaza, to get out and get out now and be protected. And if they do not, and if the Arabs insist, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and the others, Qatar, so no, they must remain in place, then what is going to happen is the new general, the new IDF, is going to remove and destroy and eradicate Hamas, as we are vowed to do, over not only the bodies of the Bibas babies and Shiri babies and the rest, but for everything that they have threatened and done to us, and they're threatening to do it again and again and again. No, they won't. If Steve Witkoff, if the Arab nations cannot remove Hamas from Gaza, we will remove Hamas from Gaza. And the temperature is going to be this. It's going to be the Israeli version of shock and awe. We're not sending infantry in like Levy did. We are going to send in the armored corps and the tank. And if anybody shoots at us from any building, that building is going to be destroyed. And they're going to destroy everything in their path and move on. And they're going to be followed in by the infantry, who will be there to occupy and maintain territory and make sure Hamas are not going to sneak back in like they did in the tactics under Halevi. And this is how we're going to go through Gaza, place after place, the tanks, the armored division, followed by the infantry, holding territory until the whole of Gaza is completely occupied by the IDF and Hamas has been totally destroyed. This is the future I anticipate by taking into account the steps that the Israeli government, Benjamin Netanyahu, has been doing by appointing Ron Dermer to be the point person with people like Witkoff and the White House, but also bringing in this new chief of staff. He takes over at the beginning of March. And I think what's going to happen is we are going to try and extend phase one of the deal with Hamas in order to extract more and more live hostages as we can until we get to the point where we've reached the end of the limit and there is nothing else we can do. And Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Jordan have not only not taken out the Palestinians from Gaza, but not taking out Hamas either. And then we will say, you failed in your duty. There is no way we will allow any Hamas in any representation there as well. And the COGAT that I mentioned at the beginning, the humanitarian aid, is this time round, the aid going into Gaza will be escorted by the IDF to the distribution points to make sure that Hamas behind the scenes won't be taking the aid and using it to pay for their future war machine. So that the IDF will be escorting the humanitarian aid because the United Nations and all the humanitarian aid organizations totally failed, just like the Red Cross totally failed. So Israel will be taking charge of both the humanitarian and the war aim in Gaza at the same time. We will, of course, be adopting a humanitarian corridor to inform the Gazans to get out of place and to the humanitarian aid areas where the aid will be distributed by the IDF or with any local partners we can find. This is what happens if the Arabs and Steve Witkoff fail when they begin to meet on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and come up with an alternative solution, both to what President Trump proposed or what we are likely to do.
So you've raised a couple of very interesting points and issues. I would not harp on Steve Witkoff. Steve Witkoff is the envoy of the president. You have the president, you have the Secretary of State, and you have the Secretary of Defense, and the National Security Advisor, all on one page. They are the authority in this country. Steve Witkoff may carry messages and bring messages, but keep your focus on the U.S. government. He is not the U.S. government. He is the president's envoy. Envoys come, envoys go, as you know. But secondly, you raised the point about Judea and Samaria, and you said you weren't going to stop there, but I want you to go back there as we pull this into what's going to happen in the future in Gaza. First of all, the US government is not particularly happy with Mahmoud Abbas and has cut off what do they call it? UNIFIL. I want to say UNICEF, but that's not fair. UNIFIL and this nonsense about moving the pay for slay money to a foundation, so it's not the government. I mean, we have not been snowed by this, but would you explain to our listeners what's actually been going on in Jenin and why the IDF finds itself in Judea and Samaria with an army and essentially protecting Mahmoud Abbas from Hamas? Talk to us.
I'll be happy to give you the details, the harsh details. And, if I was able, I would take my camera and point it out to the window, but it's getting a bit dark over here. I'm speaking to you from Netanya, about 10-minute walk from the beach. When you come over here, I'll take you there. But if you look out of the window over here, you will see the Shomron Hills. I'm sitting in my apartment, and over here you can see the Shomron Hills. The Shomron Hills is actually under the control of Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian authorities. That's where you have Tulkarem. That's where you have Nablus. That's where you have Jenin. Just here, outside my window, 15 miles to Jenin, 8 mile, 9 mile to Tulkarem. So this meeting in the Kiryat is in advance of what we're actually doing right now. In the Shomron area, we have wiped out what's called the Lion Den terror group that operated out of the Nablus so-called refugee camp. And we're seeing the new IDF strategy in place that's supposed to be an area supposed to be under the Palestinian Authority, funded by Mahmoud Abbas, where Hamas has been allowed to build up terror networks and operation centers in the so-called refugee camp. Refugee camps are really parts of the town that have been where Palestinians, Arabs have been living for 4 and 5 generations, and yet they're refugees. From where? Haifa, whatever. This is the other joke about what they don't say, the hidden joke about Gaza. Gaza, they say, is part of Palestine, but you ask any people in Gaza and say, no, we're Palestinian refugees. So you have 2 million Arabs living in Gaza, follow the logic here, right? Saying, well, we're refugees. So basically what they're saying is you say to anybody in Gaza, therefore, you're saying Gaza isn't part of Palestine. Oh, yes, it is, but we're refugees from somewhere else. So, how do you play this, spin this coin? It's head you win, head you lose. No, it's head you win and head you win if you do it that way. This is going on in there. So you have 4th and 5th generations in places like Jenin and Tulkarem and Nablus and these places as well, who have been there multi-generational this time, but they all consider themselves refugees because they want to be living where I'm living in my apartment building in Netanya. So what has been taking place is actually just a few days ago was the first time for about 2 or 3 decades that Jenin saw Israeli tanks in the street. And we are now, we were attacked the last week or two from these houses and places in the refugee camps. And we're doing there what we started to do in Gaza. We are now pulling down the so-called refugee camps. The majority of people in Jenin and in Nablus and in Tulkarem live in other areas. They don't live in what they call refugee camps funded by UNRWA. This is going on 10 miles from where I'm living over here. UNRWA are maintaining so-called refugees. They're not refugee camps. The buildings are about 60, 70 years old, right? They're old buildings with alleyways and everything. But they have become networks of Hamas or Islamic Jihad over here, 10 miles from where I'm living in Netanya, which is a 10-minute walk to the sea. So Israel right now is destroying these so-called refugee camps that have become the hotbeds. And this happened basically just a few days after we discovered 5 buses, public buses, loaded with bombs. I don't know if you heard about this incident.
We have heard about it, but tell us, because The newspapers did not cover it. Even what I would consider pro-Israel newspapers here didn't cover it. Tell us about the buses and that woman.
Apparently, we were shocked a few nights ago by two buses exploding in the night in the bus stations near Bat Yam in Israel, south of Tel Aviv. And the Shabak and the Mossad called for an examination of all the public buses. And we found that 5 buses had dynamite, had explosives packed under some of the seats of these buses. Thank God it happened at nighttime, because this had been happened during the day when the buses would have been packed. You would have been reading or hearing or seeing the results of multiple buses exploding with hundreds of deaths of Israeli passengers on these buses. And so they went in chase of the cause. And apparently this is again an Iranian-funded operation in which the Iranians provided the Palestinians, not from Gaza, but down the road, across out of my window over here, with the munitions and with the training to go in undisguised on buses and leave bombs with timers on in the buses before getting off. We have escaped a mass bombing attack in Israel. And what is happening is enough, and we are now destroying the centers of terror and Hamas terror operations in what we call Judea and Samaria, what the Palestinians and your network like to call the West Bank, which is just 10 minutes drive from where I am over here.
So
you can see how delicate this situation is. So although that goodness is not in the media yet, I'm sure probably by the end next week you'll be hearing that certain parts of Jenin, Tulkarem, and Nablus no longer exist. And there have been hundreds of people arrested on terrorist charges, and there have been somewhere between 27 and 38, the numbers are letting me down here, who have been killed, who were armed terrorists who wanted to take on the IDF. This is why the tanks are in Jenin right now, because we're employing a tactic there that we began to attack in Gaza. And the warning is on that we cannot rely on Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority, even in the area under their jurisdiction, the area that we surrendered to them in the name of peace. And they are funding Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority are funding anybody who kills Israelis and Jews under what we call their pay-to-slave policy, which they call it their welfare policy. So they are hand in glove. The Palestinian Authority are hands in glove, which would with other terror organizations, not in Gaza right now, but over here. And this is the example that the Arab nations are going to meet on Wednesday and discuss to bring in the Palestinian Authority into Gaza to be a fig leaf for Hamas or any other terror group in Gaza.
Now, it should also be said,
do you understand the absurdity of this?
Hamas attacks the Palestinian Authority when it wishes. And part of Israel, as I had understood, that part of Israel's goal is to make sure they can't attack Israel, but also, for now, Israel needs the Palestinian Authority in Judea and Samaria. So people here forget that there was a civil war in Gaza, that the Palestinian Authority used to govern Gaza. This is not a first if they go back. It is a going back. And they were ousted in a very brutal civil war in 2007. So it looks to me, and I would like confirmation from you, that what we're really saying is we're going back to before the Palestinian Civil War. Hamas thinks that it runs things. The Palestinian Authority will be told that it runs things. And it seems to me that under that scenario, you're going to have another civil war in Gaza, and that's not good for anybody. So It should be our interest, our American interest, as well as Israel's interest, to keep the Palestinian Authority out of Gaza, which raises another question. Going back to Gaza, let's assume for the moment that there is agreement that Hamas cannot rule, and you have to create something else to rule. Do you need an interim period where the IDF rules to make sure that it's clean And then what kind of coalition or what kind of, I don't know, conservatorship do you see coming to Gaza?
But you're dragging me to my solution.
I know that.
Well,
Oh, everybody, wait. Everybody who's listening, Barry Shaw has been considering the future of Gaza for a long time, and he's going to talk about that now. Let's talk about the future of Gaza, Barry.
a new Gaza, new Middle East. You know when I wrote this?
Nope.
It was published in the Jerusalem Report in December the 25th, 2023.
Oh,
2 months after the 7th of October. This developed actually into an ongoing thing in which I made this proposal of a new Gaza. Basically, it says a new Gaza, a new Middle East as an Abraham Accords protectorate. So my solution then is this, and it could still apply today, particularly under President Trump, is the way I saw it, that with Gaza being so destroyed because of Hamas, not because of Israel, they brought it on themselves and needs to be rebuilt. We all agree about that. But you cannot rebuild, and this is why I don't trust the Arabs at all in their meeting. You cannot rebuild Gaza without reconstruct Gaza without denazifying the people of Gaza. In other words, the two go hand in hand. The de-radicalization is just as important as rebuilding the houses. Now, I don't believe that Israel could adequately do that. And this is why I proposed at the time, we need a cooperative venture, not through as what's going on right now. The Arab countries are meeting with Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Jordan and Egypt and UAE, but Israel can't be there. Witkoff could be there, but Israel can't be there. Why? We are not a partner in what has to be decided in Gaza. We absolutely have to be there. I'm not saying we have to control Gaza, but if you want a cooperative venture, let's do it together. And I propose what I call an Abraham Accords protectorate. Now, what's a protectorate? There are many successful protectorates in the world. The United States have about 5 protectorates. Puerto Rico is one. France has protectorates. Britain has protectorates. The Falkland Islands was one of the protectorates. And when Argentina went to conquer it, the British went to war against Argentina. Now, the 2 main protectorates that, in my example, that the Americans led was first of all in Europe after World War II, in West Germany, where in fact the Allies, led by the United States, turned West Germany into a protectorate, Marshall Plan, basically to denazify the Germans, but also rebuild Germany into a prosperous democratic country. The border was in West Berlin because East Berlin was the Soviet Union, was the Russians. But we denazified West Germany and it became the prosperous democratic country it is today. And America did it again. America did it in Japan. Do you know that what happened with America and Japan? Japan surprised America with an attack on Pearl Harbor. They killed 2,000 Americans in Pearl Harbor. And for that, America went to war, world war against Japan. Hamas killed their 2,000 people, soldiers and civilians, on the 7th of October and have killed other more people since. And yet when we went in there to destroy Hamas, we were pilloried across the whole world. But what did America do? You went in pursuit of Japan in order to get them to surrender. And when they didn't, you bombed them with 2 atom bombs before they complied. And then Japan became a protectorate of America until it was de-radicalized over imperialistic campaigns and ambitions. But you also rebuilt Japan to become a prosperous democratic nation it is today. So these examples should be applied to Gaza, that rebuilding and the reconstruction has to come with also the denazification and the de-radicalization of the people. And if it means taking the people out so it can be rebuilt and then bringing them back to go undergo a de-radicalization, so be it. And this is where for instance, I think the moderate Arab nations come in. They can rebuild the mosques and the hotels and together with Trump, but they also should have to fill those mosques with their own imams teaching their moderate form of Islam, and the madrasa schools teaching the same moderate Islam as well, while America and Israel can teach the people of Gaza reading, writing, and arithmetic to give them the better future, a well-paid job in peace and prosperity. Because if you don't take the two in hand under a protectorate, you will never have a solution for Gaza. I'll finish off by saying this. I wrote another article. I would send people to Substack to see it, to talk about Gaza, the curse of Gaza. Eyeless in Gaza, the most cursed place on earth, where I wrote a history of Gaza. This is one of the smallest places on earth that has become the most untamable place on earth. And it seems to be going on to these days. And I think we need a more forward-looking future, possibly under the framework of, I said, under a President Trump, Abraham Accord protectorate. So that President Trump can apply his thinking. He called Gaza could be the Riviera of the Middle East. I called it in my article the Côte d'Azur, the new Côte d'Azur of the Middle East. But in December 2023, I was writing about it before I guess even President was even thinking about it. But it seems he and I are on the same track. And I think this meeting that Steve Witkoff is having with the Arabs will not get to the solution, because the Arabs will say Israel can have no part in the rebuilding and reconstruction of Gaza. I think Israel has to take an essential role in that.
Again, I would not overemphasize the Witkoff issue. He's going to listen. He's going to put things on the table. He doesn't make the final decision. His president does. So if in fact you are on the same page as the president, and I mean, it certainly sounds like you and the president and Secretary Rubio and Secretary Hegseth are on the same page. I think part of Witkoff's job is to listen and to take back. So I don't know that we're going to hear a whole lot from Witkoff, and I'm not sure that that worries me quite as much as it seems to worry you. What is of concern, and I don't know if he'll put this on the table or the president's already put it on the table, in order to get to that protectorate status, and in order to get to that reconstructive status, in order to get to whatever you want to get to, it does require the disarming of Hamas. Now, Hamas is pretending. I don't think anybody buys it. I don't think the United States buys it. But when you watch that really horrible, hideous footage of the hostage return, and you see Hamas with their head masks and the banners and the guns and the things, and Osama Hamdan, who was a Hamas spokesman, said, "We're not disarming. Forget it. We're not doing it." It looks as if Hamas has not been destroyed. It looks as if Hamas is prepared to continue fighting, and that seems then to require counter warfare. That seems to require Israel, because no one else will do it. But does it do something to Israel's deterrent power as well, to see these guys with their guns and their banners and their headscarves doing hideous things to civilian people? What does Israel see when it sees that? Is that impetus to go to war and wipe them out, or is that a deterrent to your deterrent?
Israelis right now are totally in shock and in depression. But at the same time, once we have buried the Beaver's mother and the kids, and been able to extract some of our hostages alive, this is the main ambition. There is a rage burning in the heart of every Israeli that there is no way Hamas can come out of this alive and potentially killing in the future. And therefore, there is support for once the hostages have been released. And this is going to require some sort of finesse. I don't know how Benjamin Netanyahu, Ron Dermer, is going to persuade Steve Witkoff that he's going to have to persuade Qatar and Egypt and Jordan to either delay phase 2, because unfortunately, Witkoff says there will be a stage 2, and therefore there has to be a solution. And he cannot go to Saudi Arabia and join in this Arab summit in order to come away there and say, okay, we have the solution, and Hamas remains there in some unarmed, what they're going to say, unarmed form, really. We don't believe that. Hamas has to be removed from Gaza. And the people have to be seen, either executed or removed. And if that doesn't go, Israel will be determined, for the sake of everything and for the sake that this isn't going to happen again and again and again. So once we have our hostages back, and that is the first and foremost thing, to go into Gaza and complete the job. I just want you to know, as an aside, I just glanced at it over here, to what I was saying about the solution of Gaza. And President Trump called it can be the Riviera of the Middle East. I called it the Abraham Accords Protectorate. I want to show you, and your viewers, a picture. I don't know if you can make this out. Do you know what this is?
That's the Gaza pier.
Sorry?
That's the pier.
No, it's not the US pier. That one goes away to Ashkelon. This is a plan that was drawn up by Israel when Israelis were actually living in Gaza. It was part of Israel. This plan is of an offshore airport and marina with a road bridge onto the main shore of Gaza. Do you know who drew up this plan?
No.
It was an Israeli politician who was the transport minister. His name was Israel Katz. He is today's defense minister. This plan was from 20 so years ago, when Israel was developing Gaza and turning it into a paradise. You referred to it before, Shoshana, correct? And what did we do? We were forced, under a right-wing prime minister, Ariel Sharon, to literally drag out 9,000 Jews over there, kicking and screaming. And we also exhumed the dead Jews who had died in Gaza as part of Israel, in order to give it to the Palestinians as another wild peace gesture. What happened when we withdrew every Jew from Gaza? There was a war there, a civil war between the Palestinians and the Palestinians, between Hamas and Fatah. And Hamas won that war. That's the reason they're still there today. That's the reason Mahmoud isn't there. Mahmoud Abbas isn't there. And if you have an election in Ramallah today, harking back to what I told you is happening in Tulkarem, Jenin, and Nablus, Hebron, the other places as well, this is the population living under Mahmoud Abbas, the so-called Fatah PLO Palestinian Authority. And if there was an election in Ramallah today, Hamas will win hands down. Whenever I talk to any mainly European diplomat who talk about the two-state solution, I make this proposal. Mr. Minister, Ambassador, do one thing first. Ask the Palestinian Authority, supervised by your country, to have a survey. If there was an election in the Palestinian Authority territories tomorrow, who would you vote for? Fatah or Hamas? Mahmoud Abbas or Marwan Barghouti, the mass killer? I'll tell you what the results are. 76% at least of the Palestinians would vote Hamas. So if you made this necessary democratic requirement that the Palestinians have to tell us right now who they would support if we wanted to create a Palestinian state registered in Ramallah, and you find out that the vast majority will vote Hamas, would you allow that state to be established?
What do they tell you when you ask that question of Europeans? What do they say?
They waffle. They won't do it. This question should have been asked of Anthony Blinken. It's a question he wouldn't answer because he knows the answer. So this myopic, delusional view of if we create a Palestinian state, everything is going to be wonderful. You tell that to any Israeli and they would think you're out of your mind.
It goes to a larger question also. The removal of Jews and the IDF security presence from Gaza was the second one. The first would be from Lebanon in 2000. And does it seem to you that when the IDF leaves and there's what's essentially empty space, the southern part of Lebanon was not actually governed by the government in Beirut. It was empty space, and it was taken by Hezbollah. And then Israel did it again and got Gaza under Hamas. Is this one of the reasons that Israel operates in Judea and Samaria to ensure that Mahmoud Abbas doesn't fall at the moment to Hamas, which is essentially falling to Iran?
Which is, what is it they say, the scientific Turk of doing the same thing over and over again and coming to the same conclusion? I think the scientific work is insanity.
Okay.
Surely this is going on. Surely this is going on. And my fear is the Arab countries will get together, probably led by the influence of Qatar, with Steve Witkoff sitting there as Donald Trump's envoy and saying, don't worry, we will take charge of Gaza. Leave Israel out of this. We will come up something where the Palestinian Authority will become the holding organizations while we reconstruct Gaza. I would suggest that Donald Trump don't put in a penny, $1 into this thing, because Israel will be having to go in and destroy it all again.
Yeah, I would not harp on Steve Witkoff.
You have to. What I'm talking about, Shoshana, is reality. These are facts on the ground. And the 7th of October has been repeated every day since. And I think even some of the most left-wing people are coming to this conclusion. Today, as I'm speaking to you, Oded Lifshitz is being buried. Oded Lifshitz is the 84-year-old from near Oz, who he and his wife was taken hostage into Gaza. And his wife was released, but his body was also had an autopsy was brought over. And he was also brutally murdered by the hands of the Palestinians in Gaza. Shall I tell you something about Oded Lifshitz?
Yes, please.
He spent his life as a peacenik. He spent his life going into Gaza, talking with the Palestinians, helping the Palestinians with their problems. He was one of the kibbutzniks in the south who were meeting the Palestinian women who needed to take their kids to hospital, drive them there and back. And yet, these number terrorists knew where he lived. They took him and his wife into Gaza. They let the wife come out and they killed him. His wife said she feels betrayed by the Palestinians they cared for so much.
She is betrayed.
His wife said she feels betrayed by the Palestinians, that they gave so much of their life and dedicated to be peaceniks for the poor Palestinians. This is what you get.
She is betrayed. And all the Israelis who have given things over time to the Palestinians in hopes that something would happen are all betrayed, but they're betrayed at two levels, it seems to me. One, clearly by Palestinians, but also by a concept that I'm not sure we've gotten rid of, but maybe we will soon. And that is that if you're nice to people, they'll be nice back to you. The US went through that in a series of things in the Biden administration, including the conversations with Iran and removing the sanctions from the Houthis and removing the oil sanctions from Iran. We did it in Afghanistan. We left Afghanistan and $6 billion worth of equipment and Bagram Air Base and a lot of Afghans who actually helped us and should have been taken out with us, and we didn't take them out and talk about betrayal. And the administration said the Afghans promise they're going to let the women go to school and they're going to let the children go to school and let the women, and they haven't done any of it. The latest from the Taliban that we've heard is that they are requiring windows on all of the ground floor buildings. Why do they want windows? Because the voice of a woman may come through the opening, and then somebody outside the building will hear a woman, and that's not legal anymore in Afghanistan. So what I'm saying is the theory that if you leave Gaza, the Gazans will be nice to you. If you give them autonomy in Judea and Samaria, they will be nice to you. If you give them millions and billions of dollars in UNRWA and other aid, they will be nice to you. And if you leave southern Lebanon, you have a border. There's no reason they won't be nice to you. So that was our thinking in the last 4 years, and in the Obama administration before that, Trump in the middle. And I suspect that has infected Israel a little bit as well. Would you say that that's over now in Israel? I think it's over here, by the way. I don't think there's anybody here who wants to pay off people to be nice to us.
Doesn't work. Doesn't work. And, as long as your audience switch off now, I'll make a personal confession to you. How I mentioned about the list, but how I went from being a lefty, give peace a chance, John Lennon sort of guy, to, I wouldn't call myself a hard right wing. I call myself a simple center realist. And that was when we said, well, we should give Arafat another chance and bring him to Ramallah. That was before he sent his suicide bombers to my town here in Netanya. One of those nearly killed my wife. We had 2 suicide bombers at the shopping mall, 1 on the market, 2 at Beit Lid, 1 in the Park Hotel at Pesach. And this is why I was mugged into reality by Arafat, not Hamas. Arafat, our peace partners, suicide bombers. You know when this happened? This has happened after he said he was going to give us peace of the brave, and the world gave Yasser Arafat the Nobel Peace Prize. I found out, as I said, mugged into reality here in Netanya, where I realized that Yasser Arafat killed more Jews, more Israelis after he received the Nobel Peace Prize than he killed before. And that's when I went in search of answers. What was the motivation, the real motivation of people like Arafat, Fatah, the PLO, and Hamas? And it goes into their deeply religious and political ideology that they cannot abide to see Israel, the Jewish state, existing anywhere in the Middle East. And if they capture any territory, it has to be Judenrein. And this is today. This is reality. And nothing has shown me that this realistic view that I have of the Palestinians is in any way false or can be corrected. It cannot be. In the words of Hamas, what we did on the 7th of October, we will do again and again and again. You'd better believe them.
I believe it, and it looks like Israelis believe it, because there was a recent poll that shows that 68% of Israelis support President Trump's plan to relocate the residents of the Gaza Strip, and 20% oppose the plan. Now, I would suggest that President Trump did, as he often does, he makes a big sweeping statement about how things will be. And then you kind of wait and see what other people come back with. And so I think that's part of why Steve Witkoff, whose name I said was not going to come out of my mouth, is going to listen to these people. In the US, the first thing he did was announce tariffs on Canada and Mexico. And people went crazy. And they started talking about all the people that would lose their jobs and how we need Canada and Mexico, and this is a terrible thing to do. Mexican president, the Canadian prime minister, said it was awful too. But you know what? The tariffs were never actually imposed, because the second thing out of the mouths of President Sheinbaum of Mexico and Prime Minister Trudeau was, okay, let's talk about the border. The Mexicans now have troops on our southern border where they belong, and they're working with the US to control the border. And the same is true in Canada. So it is possible that President Trump threw it out there to see what he would get. And maybe he'll get what he doesn't like. Maybe he'll get what he does like. And maybe he'll understand when Israel takes the position that it's Israel's people that need security and Israel will be responsible for that. We'll have a new day. I don't know. I am not sure.
I,
So
I, I,
you're sure, right? So I'm going to give you the last word here because we are coming to the close of the program. And my habit, and this will be hard for you, is that we close the program on a positive note. The most positive note I could think of was the example of Canada, Mexico, and the tariffs, and that perhaps the neighbors will have second thoughts after their first thoughts. Do you have a positive note to leave our listeners on?
Yeah, before I do that, I'd say, first of all, if Witkoff is coming here tomorrow, and if his plan is to meet with Benjamin Netanyahu and then go to this Arab summit, I would suggest that he return to meet with Benjamin Netanyahu before he flies back to America.
Very good.
And appraise Benjamin Netanyahu of what was said there and what possible conclusions they are, before he goes back to President Trump without informing Benjamin Netanyahu first, because Benjamin Netanyahu might give him some food for thought before to think about on the long flight back to Washington, D.C. The other point I want to make, I don't call it a positive note, but when Trump said that, for instance, all hell may break loose, even in perhaps Egypt and Jordan, if they didn't agree to take in 2 million Palestinians from Gaza. I have a certain amount of sympathy for actually a Sisi in Egypt and also Abdullah in Jordan, because I can see the potential dangers to them if they all took in 1 million Hamas supporting Palestinians. Because let's think about Egypt, for instance, Shoshana. You have to remember, how did Sisi come into power? It was because the Muslim Brotherhood has actually unseated Mubarak, and prior to that, they had killed Sadat, who had just made peace with Egypt. So he's sitting on although he was head of the military, on a very delicate throne, and I don't think he could possibly stomach the idea of 1 million radicalized Hamas-supporting Palestinians going into the Sinai. The same goes with Abdullah. He also, I have great sympathy for him, and Israel is doing an enormous amount to protect him and keep him alive and keep him on the throne, because although he has at least a 60% Palestinian population, he is a Hashemite king, which is about 10% of the population. And his throne is very shaky. I think you could see his attitude and his facial expression when he was in the White House with President Trump. And I feel a great deal of sympathy for him. And I can understand how he couldn't possibly accept, even on a temporary basis of 10 years or more, 1 million Hamas-trained Palestinians coming from Gaza into his kingdom. I don't think he'd be able to withstand the uprising that would happen against him, that can happen anytime right now in Jordan. So I have a great deal of sympathy for these people. I think Trump also has a certain responsibility to do whatever is needed to keep them in power, because the alternatives in Egypt and Jordan could be infinitely worse than the situation right now. I don't know if that's a positive note to end on, right?
I'll take it.
The only positive one I can say is perhaps to study more closely my solution of an Abraham Accords protectorate in Gaza, headed by the Trump administration, but together with, let's say, Saudi Arabia as a new partner for the Middle East. And they have to be, one of the jobs that Steve Witkoff should be, is to move the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia away from this obsession that only the Palestinian Authority can be the solution for the peace in the Middle East. They've not been a solution for the last 50 years, and they won't be a solution for the next 50 years. Somebody, could be Witkoff, maybe has to start perhaps hinting and pushing the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia into a completely different vision. The sort of vision that made his country, the UAE and Bahrain, the moderate Arab states they are now. Again, I repeat, an Abraham Accords protectorate could be that solution.
I think it is a positive note in two ways. First of all, the interests of Israel and Egypt and Jordan do actually align. I'm glad you said because I feel sorry for Sisi being under a lot of this pressure. Take all these people who hate you, and let's see what they do in your country. I agree with him that it's a very dangerous thing for him. But then it seems to me that the alliance, so to speak, which will never be on top of the table, but under between Israel and Jordan and Egypt, has legs to stand on. Everybody wants Hamas gone. All three of them want Hamas gone. And the question is how, and the answer may be Israel. So I don't think that's unoptimistic. I also think that your suggestion of a protectorate is a great one. As you know, we've written about it as well. But it requires that Hamas leave also. And so it seems to me that at the end of the day, the way you get the moderate Arab states to agree to do what they ought to do is to ensure that they don't get killed. And that again means Hamas has to be destroyed. So we end up with all hell breaks loose. And that puts Israel and the president in the same place in order to get to the other things. And so there, on that note, which I'm going to pretend is positive, even though it will require more destruction and more bloodshed. And I'm going to thank you for a really fascinating hour. We will be posting this and we will be telling our people to go pick it up because they didn't get to see you last week. And let me say to those that are listening, we've got a couple of very interesting guests coming over the next few weeks. Check the website, you'll get your invitation. We look forward to having you with us when our guest is in person. But Barry Shaw, thank you. This was great.
Thank you for all the great work you're doing, Shoshana. Thank you.